And Dave Coriel, welcome to the Youth Ministry Motion podcast.
Thanks. It's great to be with you.
I'm excited about this topic today. As we talked earlier, I have a little bit of a history with Christian Endeavor, which is a fantastic organization. All the links, by the way, will be down in the show notes for all that are watching, those that are listening, where you can reach out to that. And this, as an organization, fantastic, empowering students. But David, here's the real question. You're in a room full of middle school students. Okay. Now I know you're the CEO, but if I threw you back into a room of middle school students, what is going to be your go-to game to uh get them in order here? Or I should say this way, what game would you hope a young person would lead in that scenario?
Uh, yeah. So my go-to game now, it depends on the setting.
Sure.
If I'm in a place where there is a ping pong table, then there's a game that I love that we call battle ping pong. And now it depends on the size of the group of students. Now, obviously, if I'm with a group of 100 middle school students, then I couldn't play this game. But if I'm with a smaller group of students, this game is so much fun. Everybody grabs a ping pong paddle, and if there aren't enough ping pong paddles, you can grab a plate or whatever, anything that they can use to hit a ping pong ball. And then they start off by lining up around the ping pong table so everybody knows who follows who.
Right.
After that, the game starts with a regulation ping pong serve, but then that's the only part of it that's like ping pong. After that serve comes across, you have to let the ball hit the ground. And so now you can't be playing on carpet. It has to be like a solid floor. But when that ball bounces up, then you have to get the ball up on the table. It doesn't matter which side of the table, it just has to get table. Now, the other thing is you can hit it off the ceiling and onto the table. You can hit it off of a wall and onto the table. You just can't hit it off a person and onto the table. But then whoever follows you has to anticipate where that ball is going to go. And as soon as it hits the floor, same thing. They just have to get it up on the table. And I've been on youth retreats and I have seen students just pack an area and watch this game for 2 to 3 hours with sweat dripping off of people and all of this, and they just get so into it. And so I absolutely love that game. You need the right setting, kind of if you have a place where you can have a ping pong table and you have a few walls that are closed, it just makes it a blast because you have people hitting the ball off the wall and onto the ping pong table and down to the floor, and just you have people diving and doing all kinds of things, bodies flying everywhere. Yeah, and so it's a great time. So that's probably my go-to game.
That's your go-to. I'm in. I'm going to steal all of that, and all of you listening and watching should do the same. But Dave, we got you today because of an idea, a concept, which I think every youth pastor needs to hear. I'm a huge advocate of student leadership, and not just student leadership or student leadership teams, but students actually leading the youth ministry. And you have a book coming out, and it is called Less Like Hippos, More Like Honeybees. And we have to dive in today because we want to talk about the difference beyond the animalistic nature of the hippo and the honeybee. We want to talk about the difference between those. So I'll start first with the hippo. That we want. I assume we want youth ministry to look more like honeybees than hippos. But the question then is, what is the hippo mentality? What is the hippo mentality, and how can the church not be that?
Sure, sure. Yeah, the hippo mentality is when we treat young people like consumers. And so when you think about a hippopotamus, you think about this creature that it's huge and it comes out of the water for 6 hours every night and it chomps and it just eats up to 110 pounds, give or take, of vegetation every single day. So, we think of hungry, hungry hippo. I mean, these animals are just munching. You think about your most intense pizza party with your youth group, and it pales in comparison to what these creatures do every day. And and we treat young people like hippos when we invite them into our youth ministries and we sit them on a little conveyor belt and we just let them ride the ride and watch what's going on as we craft incredible programs for them to just sit and take in. And so they're taking in great stuff, but if they aren't activated in having to do anything, then at the end, they just go home. And then we have to try to figure out how we can up the game the next week. And so we set ourselves up for a position where we're trying to out entertain the world. And that is just not where we want to be as youth workers. But that's the concept between or around this hippos as consumers, also a little bit combatant. It's interesting to think about that hippopotamus will kill more people in a given year than spiders, lions, and sharks combined. And so these creatures, they actually are combatant. They will recognize what their turf is, and they don't want to give it up. And so this is how we treat young people. I want to be careful to say there's a difference between how we treat them and how they actually are. For us, we need to wade into that relationship, and we quickly recognize that you can break through all of that. But as adults, if we treat them as if they are combatant and territorial and just made to consume, then they take on the image that we cast of them. And so that's why we want to say less like hippos, because that's how often we treat young people.
Yeah, and I think you'd agree that it puts the youth pastor in a performance position, where that pastor has to perform every week, uh, for everyone, and to grade themselves or to judge themselves every week based on their performance versus the fruit, that should be cropping up in a ministry. Is that pretty much? Would you say that's on the mark there?
Yeah, I agree with that. And it leads them towards setting up specific goals, or, I just use a sports analogy of setting up goalposts that end up being the wrong ones. And so you have objectives that are how many young people are attending what it is that we're doing. And so if that is your main goal, just how many young people show up, well, of course, that could lead you towards an entertainment mentality and a consumption mentality.
Yeah.
Because it really doesn't matter if there's life change or not. It just matters if you have enough people showing up that it's going to please all of the people that you're trying to please with that number, whether that's yourself or whether it's other boards that you report to. But if you have a different set of goalposts, and the goalpost we recommend is to actually ask the question, how are we helping young people commit to Christ 24/7? And so now all of a sudden, if that becomes the question that we're asking, and we develop everything that we do as a ministry focus to drive towards that goal, well, that changes everything, because sitting on that conveyor belt isn't going to get the job done. Now, I use this conveyor belt. When my wife and I have 4 kids, they're grown now. But when they were younger, we used to go to this place called Hershey Chocolate World, and it's right off of the Hershey Amusement Park in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and you could go to Chocolate World for free. So on rainy days, because we lived about 15 minutes away, we'd pile into the minivan and we'd drive over there and would sit in this car and you'd ride through the ride and you'd see how chocolate was made. And it was awesome. And then at the end of the ride, you piled out of your car and you walked up this ramp and they gave you a free piece of chocolate. And our kids, what would they do? Again, again. And sometimes in our weak parenting moments, we would ride it again. But
Yeah.
but the point was that they didn't come off that ride and say, "Hey, how do I make chocolate? Let me do that."
Yeah.
No, they just wanted to ride. One time, just for kicks, we when our grown kids were home, we said, "Let's go to Chocolate World." And so we drove over there and we rode the ride. We had some good, reminiscing moments. When we got off, there wasn't a single one of them that was saying again,
Mm.
because they had grown past it. And that's what happens in our ministries. Young people come and they sit as part of the ride, that adults sit and do everything for them. And then we just hope that they're going to say again, again, and come back. The difference is if they are intimately involved doing the ministry, it's totally different and it's transformative. So
Yeah, yeah, and if you live too, and this is my advice to, just listening to your analogy of the goalpost too, there's nothing to stop your committees from moving the goalpost because once you're in that mode, they're always moving it a little bit further away where you have to keep up with that, versus, the way that we wanna talk about, which is about honeybees. And, tell me, what is it about the bees, and why is this the optimum model for youth ministry?
yeah, I think it's the optimum model because it looks like the kingdom of God. You have I don't know if you've ever stumbled upon an actual beehive. I've had that happen on more than one occasion. And you can have anywhere from about 10 to upwards of 60,000 bees that are in one of these hives. And what is interesting is every member of that hive has a task, and they are carrying out with that task with passion. And they are doing that in a mode that unleashes their creativity, because they do this work collaboratively so that they can create. And that's the beauty of that model. It's not one person being lifted up above another. I mean, yeah, is there a queen? Yeah, that queen has a pretty important task. But if you took away what the worker bees do, what the drone bees do, your hive wouldn't exist. They are so interdependent. They need each other. They feed off of each other with the different things that they do, and they do that in a way that creates. And so, what's beautiful is to think about our youth ministries in our churches as as incubators of impact, as opposed to hippo conveyor belts or hippo factories, as I call them in the book. Uh, so that's the idea with the honeybee understanding. There's one other aspect of it though that is so interesting. I talked to someone that owns a bunch of hives. Actually, he has his own apiary, as they call it, place that they harvest honey and whatnot. And and so I was talking to this guy, and he explained one time he had this hive of bees that was extremely just intense, like they were ornery. You'd walk anywhere near them and bees were just flying up to you and stinging you, and you didn't even do anything. And he's like, man, that made me so frustrated. I realized I had to requeen that hive. And I said, requeen? It's like, what is that? And he said, oh, he said, if you don't like the personality of the hive, you can actually switch out the queen. And it's this process called requeening. And then what happens is the hive takes on the personality of their new queen. And now what's beautiful that with that is like, obviously in the kingdom of God, we've got a king, not a queen, but we've got the king, our Lord Jesus Christ. And he is the one that, as a hive, we want all members of the hive to take on his likeness, to take on his personality and integrate that into how we live. And so that's the other aspect of this honeybee thing. I mean, we want young people. Yeah, do we want them to use their talents and abilities? Yeah, but we could do that with any youth organization. What makes us different is that we're helping young people take this on as an activity in the midst of the kingdom of God. And that is the other beautiful aspect of being more like a honeybee.
Well, yeah, and I would think too that if youth pastors were honest, they're saying, yes, I want my kids to be more like Jesus, but what happens is that youth pastors are pointing at themselves and looking at or a model of ministry or a set of meetings or things like that and say, we're trying to become more like this model or this thing. And I think youth pastors, if they were honest, would say, listen, I really don't want them to be the youth meeting. I want them to be more like Jesus. And the only way to do that, like you said, is to put the students in a place where they can act like Jesus, where they can model what Jesus does.
Yeah, yeah, so true. So true. And one piece of this that is indicative of the mentality change that we need to take is that every one of us as youth workers deals with that student that is uber talented, uber excited, even has a decent amount of insight about who God is, but they never show up at any of our youth ministry stuff because they are 100% committed to, and then fill in the blank. It can be their violin, it can be their volleyball, their soccer ball, their, just, their gaming system, whatever it is. They're just totally committed to that. And what is awesome with what we're talking about with this hippos to honeybees shift, this mentality, is that you can take this and you can apply it to your entire youth ministry when you're talking about what kind of programming that you're going to do. You can apply it to that, but you can also apply it to those students that are never going to show up at your program, because you can equip families and you can equip individual students with this understanding and put the tools in their hands so that they can begin to live this out and be missionaries, even if they never step foot inside of your youth group. You can still make an incredible impact as their youth worker, their youth pastor, or whatever title it is that you have in your setting, uh, because of taking on the proper goalposts. The actual goal being, how do we help every one of these youth under the care that God has given me to care for them to commit to Christ 24/7? So
Well,
exciting.
yeah, and that's wisdom too, because if you listen, if you're counting on everybody showing up to your meeting, right? If you're counting on that as a way to facilitate this, you're missing out. But I would also say, here's a tip for you youth pastors. If you have extended family out there, if you have students who can't make everything, but you still want to invest in them, listen, you can count those as part of your youth group, by the way. Just because they don't show up to the meeting doesn't mean they're not part of youth group. So when your pastor asks you, how many did you have tonight? Well, let's see. I had 20 in the room, but I also had 10 or 15 that were not here tonight, but they're practicing, what I've given them to do. And I get reports from them on what they're doing on their campus or what they're doing with their friends or whatever they may do. So just a quick tip there, youth pastors, if you need help, when your pastor asks you how many you have, well, how many do you have practicing, right? Not how many is in the meeting.
Absolutely. It's like, how many young people and their families do you serve? And it goes beyond a number that you have at your youth group. And but it's changing the goalposts, and
Right.
not just changing the goalposts so that we look better. It's not
Right.
about it's not about that, because we can be so great at justifying and figuring out how we can contrive numbers to make us feel better or look better. But at the end of the day, if there's a youth that is on a list somewhere connected to your youth ministry, your church, whatever, those are the youth that you have the opportunity to shepherd. And how are you going to do that with a model that goes beyond whether or not their butt shows up on a seat in
Yeah.
your youth ministry?
That's right, and if it listen, I'm there. I used to count cats, dogs, small bugs. I mean, I count everybody in the room, I mean, if somebody walked in with their baby, okay, they were there too. So listen, I'm gonna count them. I like this way better. I like this way better, where you're gonna empower people outside of your youth, though, even though they were not present for a meeting, they're still doing uh, busy bee work, as you say in the book.
Yeah, I'm actually serving as a part-time pastor, a lead pastor at a church right now, small country church. And as you know, I work full time with Christian Endeavor, but I also help out with this church. And we got a solid youth worker at our church. But yeah, he'll tell me how many people are showing up at the student ministry. But he's also like, I am personally in a discipling relationship with five myself, five young people, and then he can go on, he can share, and I have these other adults that are doing, however many. It's not just about how many show up to their
Right.
weekly meeting.
That's right, that's right. Well, let me read a quote here as we kinda move through this. I wanna read a quote from your book, and, your book, Less Like Hippos, More Like Honeybees, and, get your thought on this. Your quote says, "Research shows that 60% of teenagers prefer starting their own businesses over working in traditional employment. 89% of Gen Z expresses a desire to run their own business as a preferred alternative to working for someone else. They are prolific content creators, constantly generating posts, reels, and stories. They're inspired to put themselves out there by observing online and personal influencers. Parents, pastors, and lay youth leaders can encourage these creative geniuses to contribute to the church and society significantly. But if we treat them like consumeristic hippos, these skills and creative appetites will go untapped." And I find that to be uh so dead on with this generation and generation alpha coming up as well. That they are creators, they're not consumers. So then the question is, how then do we foster, and maybe you could offer just practical tips. Just say, "Well, hey, look, how do I tap into this?" Right? How do we foster this kind of entrepreneurial autonomy? And how can youth pastors find the right role in a student's discipleship process to say, "Here's where I'm going to plug them in. Here's something practical we can do in our ministry where they can start to use that untapped potential."
Yeah, yeah. First of all, we have to believe that young people can actually do it. So often adults talk about wanting to empower youth, but they have to actually believe, if they hand off tasks to young people, that those youth are going to be able to do it. And so, first of all, we have to believe. Second, we have to expect. We have to expect more of them than what we have in the past. So, when a young person is given the opportunity, maybe they're going to shine, maybe they're going to fail. Heaven forbid that we would allow a young person to fail. But what is the best place in the world that a young person should have an opportunity to fail? Well, it's around people that have been trained to understand what mercy and grace are all about. And so, yeah, we don't let them just languish in failure. But if they fail, we come alongside and we say, what did we learn? How do we grow? But we actually expect them to be able to do more than what even they might believe that they can do. And so that's the second idea. The third idea is something I call exchange. And exchange is, and this is a wild concept, and it's going to blow some of you away because it's so simple, and yet it's going to make you go, huh. My wife and I, as I said, we have four kids aged 27 to 19. And so they're a little out of the youth age, but you'll get the idea from this. Recently, we sent just a text message. We texted each one of our kids and we said, here's something we learned from you about how we, your mom and I, can grow in our relationship of following Jesus Christ. And we want to thank you for the investment you've made in us. I have asked this at youth retreats, and I've asked, hey, youth out there, how many of you have been affirmed by any adult thanking you for what you have helped them learn? And almost always there's a couple hands that go up. For us, one of the things I think it's so important to realize that we have a young generation coming up, that we have to have this conduit mentality, that we are going to be learning as much from them as we're going to be passing on to them. But if we don't affirm them that they have value that is passed on to us, they're not going to have an openness to receive the insight that we are trying to pass on to them. And so that's a big pivot for people. I've seen people squirming in their seats going, wait a minute, you know,
Well,
is
there's no
that
doubt.
right?
I had a young man, and it's such a good point you make there. It's timely because I had a young man this weekend in my youth group for Sunday school, showed up and brought he baked muffins, strawberry muffins with
Nice.
cream cheese icing.
Oh
Now,
man.
now I was unprepared. Now, not only this, he baked them himself. This is a sophomore in high school.
Okay.
Nobody told him to do it. He just said, I like to bake and I'm going to bake me some cupcakes. I'm going to bring them in. Not only did he bring them, he brought three different kinds. He brought plain ones, ones with just cream cheese on top, and one with cream cheese and a strawberry on top. And I thought to myself, now this is a young man who entered our youth group probably maybe a year and a half ago, something like that. And, shy kid, and eventually the group kind of absorbed him as they do, and they did a great job. The students did a great job of just bringing him in to where now he's at a point where he's like, I'm just going to bring muffins and I'm going to make some cupcakes here. I'm going to bring this in. And talking about affirming, I said to myself, I just said to him, I said, hey buddy, this is magic. I said, first of all, they're delicious. I said, second of all, bring more. I said, okay. I said, I'm thinking to myself, this is the kind of behavior you want to affirm. First of all, that he would know and understand that his giftings are important, but it's also important that I affirm him so he continues to bring cupcakes. Yes,
You're
I
getting
love them,
your own personal manna from heaven right there.
buddy. You know it. But when I just want to affirm what you're saying is that listen, that kids have these abilities and talents that they're just going to show up someday and you're not going to know. You're going to be like, here's a kid, he's baking. It's like, fantastic. Now I'm going to say, hey, buddy, what, you want to make something for the next event or do you want to bring? And we have what's called student led nights for our group. So everybody's got a role and a responsibility. And so, some people are like, now his thing is like, hopefully he's going to bake something. That'd be fantastic. But also this past student leadership night that we had, I had a young man in the group who I would say he is a nominal Christian, believes in God, and everybody had a role that night except for him because he's fairly new. And I just asked him, I said, "Hey, buddy," I said, "Listen," and I knew him well enough from a trip or two or something like that to ask him, I say, "Hey, you know what? We don't have anybody to open in prayer tonight. You want to give it a shot?" I had no idea. He could have turned me down. I said, "We give it a shot." He says, "Well, I don't know what to say." I said, "Say whatever you want. There's no judgment here. You're talking to God and he accepts whatever you're going to say. So just go ahead and pray." And he prayed a very short, but I think meaningful prayer of what he wanted. But that was the first time that he had probably ever prayed out loud in his whole life. And the opportunity for me to affirm him in that, to say, that was fantastic. Thank you for doing that. That to me hopefully encourages him to pray again at a different time in a different place. So I share all that just to say, listen, this this honeybee thing works. Okay. If we're open to it, if we're willing to give away power or control or any of those things, kids will respond to it if you let them do that. Is that fair to say, David?
People have asked me what is the hardest thing to actually making this happen. And I've used the phrase that the hardest thing is getting adults to pry their bony fingers off of all the decisions of the youth ministry. That is the hardest thing. It's
Yeah.
like they just have this control, or they've always done it. And then there's all the excuses they can come up with. Oh, they're so busy. Oh, they're this and that. Let me tell you what, they are not going to get any less busy. And if we don't build the habits into their life that they are to be investing in the kingdom of God, they're going to walk. And that's all the stats are saying. They are walking.
Right.
And so we have to get past that. We have to get them plugged in so they own the ministry now. And in Christian Endeavor, we have a clear structure that we guide people through, because this can sound intimidating. It's like, oh, I'm supposed to go out there and do the hippos and honeybees, blah, 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 blah. And we break it down so that it's a simple step-by-step way to just approach it and affirm this attitude. But you can't, it's not even worth picking up that structure unless you have this mindset. I want to shift from hippos to honeybees.
Yeah, and I'm going to say too that, and I affirm that because it's a model in the sense that it's there. It's a biblical framework, sure, but unlike other things, this is something that requires a full commitment. You can't add it to something else per se. It's not an add-on. It's not stacked necessarily. And you do have some great resources over on ceworks.faith, if I'm not mistaken. So there's tons of resources to get started there. But I hear what you're saying too, because there's youth pastors that are saying in their head, they may be saying it out loud. I don't know, when they're listening and watching, they're going, great. Someone else telling me I'm doing it all wrong. Okay. That's not what we're saying. But they're feeling discouraged because now they don't know what to do. They've done what they've done for so long. Everybody got 100 million voices telling them what to do. So what advice then would you give them to the beginning, to the fostering of this mindset? It can't all be done in one night. It shouldn't be done all in one night. It's not like, all right, here's a new model of ministry. We're gonna just come in here, we're gonna do this thing, we're gonna tear things down, and we're gonna do all this stuff. What are some just basic steps? This is, look, how can I start fostering this honeybee mentality in my ministry?
Yeah, I appreciate it. That's such a generous question, and I appreciate it so much. At an absolute foundational level, youth ministry, it does not matter what model or approach that you use. If you haven't built relationships, then you're just missing the boat. And so, because you're listening to this, I know that you are engaged. You're invested in trying to learn and grow and be the very best youth pastor, youth worker that you can be. So I know so many of you are already doing an incredible job of building relationships with youth, building relationships with those other key adults that are investing energy and time with youth. And so that's the foundation. So there's no one that has been listening to this that can say that their investment of ministry has been a waste of time. As someone that's been involved in youth ministry for decades, during those times, I continued to learn and grow because culture continues to shift all the time. And so for us, I really hope that you will hear that this isn't something to bring discouragement at all, but to bring an insight that can unleash your investment in young people and take it to a brand new level. You see, applying what it is that we're talking about today, it really isn't laying all kinds of layers of additional stuff that you have to do. What it means is an intentional shift in how you do things. And let me give a for instance on that. So if you are planning some kind of event, and many of us on this podcast have been there, we've planned an event, and at the end of that event, it just didn't go the way we wanted. Maybe we didn't hit the objectives that we had for it. Maybe young people didn't show up to participate in it. So if that event is a total failure and we planned it all, then it is 100% a failure. Now let me flip the script on that. What happens if you actually invested in a group of young people that planned that event? Now maybe it will go great. Then okay, we can celebrate and all that kind of stuff. Maybe it doesn't. If that event doesn't go great, it is not a failure, because you have the opportunity to come alongside of a group of young people and say, hey, what did we learn here? What didn't go the way that we thought it would go? And we know as adults, when we get into settings and we have to execute different strategies and whatnot, if you're a solid leader, you're going to hit some bullseyes, right? You're going to hit some home runs. But in order to do that, you're going to strike out a bunch of times. And because you've been through that, you can pick yourself up and you can go on. But young people haven't had the opportunity to do that. So sometimes they're gonna excel. Sometimes things aren't going to work out. But it's always a learning and growing opportunity that God can use in the midst of their development. So all this to say, I hope that you don't feel discouraged at all, but we do have to recognize that the statistics are too consistent across too many different groups that they are not lying. The Pine Top study that was done says a million young people are walking away from at least the church, if not the faith, every single year, and that's expected through 2050, unless we can turn the tides on that. And so we have to recognize that there is something that's going on. There's an illustration I like to use. There's the Colcateca River Basin, and this is bonus time stuff. This is not in the book, but I'll put it out there anyway. The Colcateca River Basin in Nicaragua, it receives so much rain that every year it would wash out all of its bridges. And so they decided to assemble the best engineers and architects in the entire world and build a bridge that could not be moved. And so they did it, and they built this bridge. And the largest hurricane that had ever hit that area, it was coming in off the coast, and everyone was watching in anticipation what's going to happen to this bridge. And you can Google the Colcateca Bridge, and it's the bridge to nowhere. And the reason it's the bridge to nowhere is because if you see the aerial view of this, the bridge actually survived. It survived this incredible hurricane. But what happened is it washed out every road and every ramp. And on top of that, it even moved the river. And that is what has happened to us in culture. Culture has moved so much. But if we look at our youth ministries, most of us would say, yeah, this is how we did it 5 years ago. Yeah, this is how we did it 10, 20, 30 years ago. And we're still doing it. We have student leadership teams that exist in so many churches. And on the one hand, that gets a small group of youth involved. but it usually leaves about 85 to 90% of the other youth not involved. So there, we're making this really teeny little hive and having the majority be hippos.
Mm, yeah.
And there's another way we can get at that. And that's by giving every single young person the opportunity to commit and go deeper in Christ. And
Yeah.
then having a structure that unleashes them in some way to do something. So
Well, Dave,
there.
that's a great encouragement. And I hope that those who are watching, those who are listening, really take that in, because the great hymn of the church, "We shall not be moved," seems to be the motto for many youth ministries. Um, so, so I encourage you, youth pastors that are watching, that are listening, you need to get Dave's book, Less Like Hippos, More Like Honeybees. Give it a read. Nobody's telling you got to do anything. At least if you read it and say, okay, you could do or not do, as Yoda says, but you can at least read it and go, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, I need to change something. There needs to be a shift in our youth ministry. And what better shift than to go from a youth pastor centric youth ministry to a Jesus led youth ministry, empowering students to do kingdom work and giving them roles and responsibilities and all the things that you do. By the way, youth pastors, I know you're special, but there's nothing you can do that a young person can't do with a little bit of help, with a little bit of encouragement. Okay. So let me just encourage you to get now, Dave, tell me when the book is going to be available for pre-order.
Yeah, the pre-order actually is just a 2 week window, and that is September 15th to the 29th. And that's what we were encouraged to do, to just have a 2 week pre-order of the ebook. And the actual book and ebook then will be available as it drops on Amazon on November 11th. Monday, November 11th is when it drops.
Okay. Well, when we air this, all the links for all the things that we just talked about are going to be down there. So we want you to pre-order the ebook, and then go buy the book. Okay. So if you don't get it on the pre-order, you can still buy the book. It's a great book. It's not a long read. You're not reading a tome here. It is a simple, laid out book that says, hey, do we want hippos or do we want honeybees? And then you get, at the end of the book, you get to say, okay, what little small things can I do to start to perpetuate this in the ministry so that you get greater fruit from your labor than just showing up every Wednesday night and having to run everything. So that's my encouragement. Dave, tell me real quick, where, if people want to ask you more questions, if they want to get a hold of Christian Endeavor resources, anything like that, tell them where they can find all these things.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier. Ceworks.faith is a place that you can get pretty much everything Christian Endeavor USA related. If you want to have a little perspective on what's going on globally, because you can find people connected to Christian Endeavor in actually a growing number. It's 55 countries and should explode through 60 in the next 6 months. And that is just christianendeavor.com. You can go there. I also have a personal website, davecoriel.com. And so you can go out to that and just see a little bit more information about me and stuff with the book.
Okay. Well, youth pastors, you've heard it from Dave. I want you to visit him, and I want you to go ahead and send him emails or whatever and say, hey, thank him for coming on the show today, and thank him for loving young people and caring about, youth pastors and all those things. And I want to thank you, Dave, for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much. And you can find me on Instagram. I know a bunch of you on that, so drop me a line and just let me know that you heard this. And yeah, would just love to be in contact with you. But thanks so much. Thanks for your ministry. Just love all that you're doing. And yeah, keep it up, Paul.